Okay, item one. Hello. Item one is a roll call, and roll call shows that all counselors are present except Counselor Robertson, and Tom Perry is participating remotely. Moving on to item two, I'll turn it over to the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee Chair. And introduce item 2A, which is an introduction to the comprehensive planning process and initial framework for the upcoming revision. And that I will hand over to Kyle Richard.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, this is going to be a really high-level, general conversation about sort of the time leading up to our next comprehensive plan update. So we've been working a lot since I've been here and before on working on implementing the recommendations of our current comprehensive plan. So what I want to do is just talk a little bit about how long, in general, the comprehensive plan is used. Where some of that comes from the state, and then moving forward into looking at our next update of the comp plan. What sorts of things will go into that, just so we have some things to think about going forward. There's no real hard action items to come out of this, but it's pretty much the beginning of a pretty long multi-year process. So in general, comp plans, as we know and have talked about, are they're really long-term holistic planning documents, right? They're looking at a lot of different things, how they are interconnected and play off of each other. So to do that, you use the kind of layer cake model, which is, you at the most fundamental level, you're looking at the natural resources and natural features of the community and sort of building up from there. So you go into resource-based activities, economic issues, transportation, land use, the population, and you sort of get more narrow as you go up. And by doing that, you're able to identify, where things are most feasible, and you can sort of understand the community as a whole and where things make the most sense, and you can really start to analyze your existing conditions. So once you create that existing inventory of what you have in your community, you start to analyze those existing conditions and identify the primary issues that are apparent at the time. So our last comp plan talked a lot about problems or conflicts with the student population and owner-occupied housing, and we spent a lot of time talking about that. It talked about road connectivity. It talked about bringing more development to the growth area and having more resource-based activities in the rural area, protecting some natural resources, developing a program around vernal pools, things like that. So that's where all of those sorts of issues come from. And then finally, based on those issues, you start to create general goals and recommendations and recommended policies to kind of go forward and implement over the next however many years. So in regards to state law and how that kind of plays into the process, and first it's important to note that the state planning office was eliminated in 2012, but the state law in regard to the Growth Management Act and the sorts of review items that are still found and the basis for a comp plan are still there and active. Instead of going through the state planning office, though, they're administered by the Municipal Planning Assistance Program, which is now housed in the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. In 2008, the state established that a comp plan can be found consistent with the Growth Management Act, and that consistency lasts for 12 years. So when we think of a comprehensive plan as a 10-year document, in general, That 12 years is really saying that your comprehensive plan will be good and you'll work with it for 10 years, and then you'll use those last 2 years to sort of update it and create a new comp plan. It's important to note that after 12 years, it's not that your comp plan is no longer valid. It's just that the finding of consistency with the Growth Management Act that the state issued, that's no longer applicable. So, you know, if a town creates a 20-year plan, they can work on that plan for 20 years. But a lot of funding sources through the state and grants and things like that require a town to have a comp plan that's found consistent with the Growth Management Act. So that's, and I mean, just in good practice, I mean, things change over the course of a couple of decades. So, you know, that 10-year mark is probably a good period to stay with. So, you know, we're starting to come up on that number, which is why we're starting to talk about this. So a few things that you really want to focus on right at the outset of making a new comp plan or updating the comp plan. You know, probably the biggest first step is appointing and figuring out who's going to be on the planning committee that works on the comp plan. And you know, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Next, you want to look at creating a kind of unique and creative citizen participation program. You know, a huge part of the comp plan is getting the community involved and really hearing from people. I mean, obviously, certain, you know, the inventory, the analysis, some recommendations with goals and things like that are going to come from staff and council and the planning committee. But you want all of that to be, you know, to go through that public outreach process during that window where you're creating the comp plan. You know, next, you want to look at identifying and organizing the resources that you need to carry out the information gathering. So there's a lot of data and info that goes into creating that inventory of existing conditions in a comp plan, whether it's census data or, you know, mapping data through the state. So identifying, you know, all of the places that you need to go and resources you need to be able to reach to collect all of that. It's important to know all that up front. And then making a realistic schedule, including, you know, making sure you have time off and time to process everything, not trying to do too much at one time. All right, so that's sort of the basic, you know, things to look at. So start getting into some of the specifics. So appointing the local planning committee. So this is it would be the group of people responsible for actually preparing the comp plan document. And the group should really reflect the community as a whole. So it should be made up of, you know, people from different parts of the town, different demographics, different interests, different points of view. You know, you don't want just one isolated group, you know, with similar opinions and direction being the sole voice of input in the document, especially for Oreno, which has a few distinct areas and you know, a lot of different fields in certain neighborhoods going on. You know, members that are appointed, members are appointed by municipal officers, so the council would be the one eventually deciding on who is part of that local planning committee. So this will be an important thing to think about over the next year or so. The planning committee would typically be made up of members of town council, representatives from other local boards like the planning board, reps of key town departments, local businesses, land trusts, people with special interests, whether it's, you know, environmental issues, housing, things like that, both longtime and new residents. So not necessarily any special background in anything, but just people who live in the community. people with specific skills like foresters or architects, and people who both support and are suspicious of land use regulation. As you know, I think it's important that we always keep in mind that there's a lot of new policies that can be created and recommended to help make good change in the community, but it's important to make sure that we're not over compensating for something that doesn't necessarily fit. So the previous comp plan committee was comprised of 15 people, and I think in general it's probably between like a 10 to 20 person type committee. The last one was about half of it was planning board members. Now, that being said, the planning board members fall into a number of other of those categories. I mean, they're residents, they're experts in whatever unique field they happen to specialize in. There were also a couple of local business and property owners. The two town staff were the town planner at the time and administrative assistant. And then there were several other community members as well on the board.
So, so I was here when that process kind of took off, and part of the reason that we asked the planning board to kind of lead the process is because at the time, the planning board could go months without any activity. We are in a little bit different place right now. I don't know, is there, yeah, we have lots of activity in front of the planning board, which is why I think we want to have a conversation about whether or not it's fair. We have people who have done an awful lot of training and to bring themselves up to speed to be part of the planning board. And right now they are meeting every month for several hours with big packets of information to digest before meetings. So I'm not sure that just doing it the way we did it last time is going to be feasible. We also have a comp plan implementation committee that we didn't have before, so we might think about trying to run some of this through that committee. But the diversity is important. The one thing I would say we ran into a little bit of, it took a long time. They take a while. This one took a particularly long time. And so you get people who are willing to give 6 or 8 months, but maybe not 18 months of their time. And I think you also want to make sure when you're asking people to come, it's not because of their name in terms of this person's really active in this, but that they understand how much work really goes into it. One of the things we ran into a couple of times were just people who would just disappear, and then you're trying to kind of backfill in and you lose that diversity, which is kind of really important.
So kind of moving on to the timeline aspect of this, comp plans generally set out recommendations for 10 years. Beyond that, community conditions and attitudes and concerns can shift. That's why we're kind of in that 10-year time frame. The previous comp plan that we're currently working under, current, not really previous at this point. So the first committee meeting for our current comp plan update was in May 2012. They met monthly for 2 years, and in that process, there were 5 public forums. And I think looking back, it was probably, I think, pretty established that there's set meeting times, they only go for a set period of time, and that kind of fits into what I was talking about before, where you want to build in that schedule ahead of time and make sure you're not scheduling things too loosely where you get caught in details and you're missing the big picture. You want to space things out to give yourself enough time and have productive conversations that can kind of span a longer time frame than necessarily trying to figure everything out at once. So in June 2014, the comp plan update was recommended to the council. In September of 2014, it was reviewed by the state and found completed, found consistent with Growth Management Act, which would take us to, that finding of consistency would be good until 2026. So, that's, we're few years away from that at this point. And in 2015, it was adopted by the town council. So looking at the next comp plan process, looking at the time frame of how the last one worked, and I think a lot of communities are probably in that 1.5 to 2 year range. I think that makes sense, especially if we're not looking to have any consultant planning work and right, the people making up the committee could be council members or planning board members, with other obligations. So it probably makes sense to start, begin those committee meetings, next May or next summer. So that'd be, May, summer of 23. Meet and develop the plan similarly for, 1.5 to 2 years. You would bring it back to the council and review by the state in 2025, which would be 11 years after the previous finding of consistency. So we would be a year ahead of schedule. And I think it makes sense to give yourself a year buffer there if anything comes up. Some public process takes longer, or for some reason a section needs more work, or whatever it is. So that would mean starting the process, the official committee meeting process a year from now. So in that next year, it would probably be a good idea to start working on some of the lead up work to that. So establishing the size and makeup of that planning committee, gauging interest from committee members, creating a schedule, committee meetings, public participation events, things like that. General time frame of when each component of the comp plan should be worked on, completed by. So, the inventory, the policy, the recommendations, all those pieces. Having kind of benchmarks as to when those should be done. Doing a lot of research on my part. The best practices and methods for public participation. With I think specifically a comp plan in mind. We've held a lot of public outreach events with neighborhoods and on a smaller scale, 1 or 2 meeting type things, but this is an ongoing process. So that'll certainly be something that I want to learn more about, so that we're engaging with the community in the best way possible. I think, beginning to think about kind of big picture vision, statement and goals in mind, that would kind of be consistent through the whole comp plan document. It's something we didn't really have in our current comp plan that a lot of long-term plans now do have. We kind of hit on a few big ideas or goals that tie in the whole plan together.
Kyle, would that help us a little bit when it would come to implementation, and we had counselors who would see competing goals, or this is all or nothing, when in fact they all kind of weave together, and part of implementation is prioritizing for specific things, how they fit together? Yeah,
so the goals would be outside of the realm of a specific issue. So right now, you might look at a goal in the housing section and a goal in the transportation section, and you might say, which one is, or prioritizing, those sort of conflict with one another, whatever it is. Those goals would, aim to tie all of that together, so that you see each of those individual recommendations in the lens of one of those. Something else that I'd like to do in particular is research some of the other recently adopted comp plans. The state has a list of all the comp plans that have been found consistent. Going back, the list goes back to when ours was found consistent, and there's links to all of those comp plans. So reaching out to some of those planners and communities to see, what their process was like, in the last couple of years, just kind of pick their brains about that. So with all that in mind, I think the next steps really would be using the next year for kind of all of that stuff leading into the next comp plan process, and then finalizing a few things, a few recommendations from our current comp plan. So there's things we've talked about, like looking at off-street parking requirements, or whatever other remaining policy recommendations were in our current comp plan that we haven't implemented yet or haven't really talked about. And I mean, I think it's important to think of it as this next comp plan, it's an update. It's not throwing away the old comp plan and starting over. So anything that was in the previous comp plan can be carried over. So if there's something that still needs attention, or if there's something that, was looked at but wasn't really, policy was created, but maybe, council still wants to consider it in the future, all of that stuff can still be carried over. So if we don't touch on something in the next year, it's not that it's just gone forever. It's just that it would get carried into the next document.
And conversely, as long as things that council wants to do are not inherently in conflict with our current plan, council can continue to enact ordinances or make policies. So this doesn't, comp plans are important. At times it has felt like people have seen them as the only document, like the guiding document for the whole town on everything. And while it is the guiding document on land use ordinances, it is one of the documents on everything else. Make sense?
Yeah, so we're not limited and bound by law to what's in here per se.
No, however, if it's
However, it's
in there and you're applying for grants, it's helpful.
Yeah.
When it comes to land use ordinances, by law, we cannot enact a land use ordinance that conflicts with the comprehensive plan. So good, so while detail is important in a comp plan, sometimes it can get you, right? So back in 2012, we were talking about wanting to create more development opportunities. The big issue was not actually housing. Some of it was housing, but it was also using the ability to infill to increase taxable valuation. And the committee, Evan, looked around and said, you know what, the average lot size is 15,000 square feet. We could drop from 20 to 15, and because it would kind of maintain the same feel, and that was kind of the goal. Time went on, housing became more of an issue, more compact development became more of a desire. Council spent a lot of time talking about 5,000, 10,000 square foot lots. We could not drop below 15,000 because it was specifically referenced in the comp plan. So if it had been referenced, we want the council to look at dropping the lot size requirement in the medium density residential zone to allow for significant infill development. Then you could have looked at any number of lots. When the lawyer goes back to that to tell us whether it's consistent or not, they're going to be looking at what was the intent. And does this meet the intent? If there's explicit language, does it meet the explicit language? So just as we go through, we kind of want to think about where is that happy medium between giving enough information so that everybody knows where we're going, but not so much detail that you're limited until the next comp plan.
Yeah, I think they both have positives and negatives. Like the reason you'd want a specific recommendation is because it makes it easier to implement that policy when it comes time to implement it. Because you can say this was already vetted through the comp plan process. Everyone agreed at the time to this specific number. So that's what we're going with now. And we don't need as much discussion on it because it was agreed to then that this was a good number. But right, it doesn't leave you with any flexibility to change that should you want to down the line. So yeah, that's part of what I'll want to really look at in other plans, is how specific some of the policy recommendations get versus the more general language with kind of just specific goals in mind to give the town more flexibility in kind of keeping the policy, the actual policy that's developed, up to date with the current climate.
Can you answer like a strategic question? Why isn't it better than to write just a very general comp plan and to roll our specifics into a charter or something like that that we can then work?
So you don't wanna roll anything into the charter. That's the most difficult document to amend, but you could,
Well, you just said we can't amend the comp plan at all, so that would be.
so you have to go back through the whole process. Charter have to go to referendum. I would,
You also, the comp plan has to be found consistent with the Growth Management Act. So if it's too general, if you're not showing actual ways that you're going to achieve those goals, they're probably not going to find it consistent. If you just say, we'll create more housing, they might not see that as an achievable strategy or, you know, a way to actually do it. So I think that's why you need to show the state that there's an actual plan for achieving the goals, not just that you're stating, kind of restating their goals in a document. I think that would be the reason that you would want more specific.
They get to say general things. We have to say specific.
Was this a requirement of towns or cities of certain sizes or anything, doing a comp plan?
No, so that's, you don't have to. I mean, any community of a decent size should do it regardless of.
so he's giving you the planner answer. I'm gonna give you
Yeah.
the legal answer, which is any ordinance any land use ordinance that we adopt has to be consistent with a comp plan. So many communities don't have comp plans, but it's also like the community I came from before Oreno. There was no zoning other than what the
Right,
state.
if you have a zoning ordinance. it has
You
to-
can't have zoning without having a comp plan?
Right.
Yeah.
Was this one that was done in 2012 our first one?
No.
We've had one ever since we've had zoning.
So I don't know about ever since we've had zoning. I know that back in 1993, one of my graduate projects in statistics was crunching the survey results from Oreno's comp plan committee back then. So had it at least that long.
When you say that the process for amending the comp plan means you have to go back through the entire process, I mean, is that, or like,
So-
there really is no like avenue for
Public
smaller
hearings.
changes?
It's the, right in state law, it says,
Right, the state has to make that finding of consistency again, and, right, so you have the public hearings and.
public process. And so before I came to Oreno, so 2008, 2009, there was some sort of issue with the LDR. Maybe it was creating a low density residential zone. There was
Yep.
something between LDR and FNA.
So before the 2009 update, it was just, you know, whatever the MDR was up to the interstate or Stillwater, and then it was FNA. There was no LDR, there was no transitional
So-
area.
Council wanted to address that. So they seated a comp plan committee. They went through the whole process, but they said, you are only going to look at this idea of this transition zone. When we did our last update, council said the transition zone information has been done recently. We don't want you to really look at that. We really want you to focus on the growth area. And there was one element of LDR that was east of the interstate that they wanted the committee to look at. So there are some things in there that encompass the whole town, which is going to, but that's part of what, when Kyle talks about council beginning to think about what the orders are to this committee, part of is just that. It's where do you see the major issues and where do we want to focus our time?
So it's not actually going through every step of this process that Kyle was just outlined necessarily. So I mean, there could be a much smaller charge. Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely in our interest to have as robust and as in need of amendment comp plan as possible.
So
But
the way I read the statute, and Kyle is going to correct me if I'm wrong, is that whatever you open up has to go through the inventory and analysis process, has to go through the comp plan, the citizen engagement process, the public process. But that when you package it all up, like when we packaged the 2012 plan up, the FNA LDR amendment was part of that, and the whole thing had to be consistent. So it was new enough that it was still consistent. Is that?
Right.
No,
what I'm answering?
A lot of things change on the ground too, and like documents are made by human beings, obviously. And like, for example, in 2012, people were very fired up about the student housing complex issue and what that would mean going down the road. And so, and I'm not saying that there's anything in the comp plan that shouldn't be there, but human beings may have a tendency to like overcorrect in one direction at that moment because of what, you know, the conditions on the ground might be then. Maybe there are things we might want to think about differently, or, you know, I mean, conditions change, so.
yes, I guess I'm mainly concerned with what that means for our process.
Yeah.
Can we answer your question?
Yes, no, that was
Okay.
very helpful.
Yeah, so the 2009 update, I think, was specifically because we're getting all of these low-density subdivisions in the rural area, because the minimum lot size in the FNA, I think, was 2 acres.
Right.
So we're getting a lot of dead-end streets put in the rural area because it was easier to develop there than in the growth area. So they came back, updated to add in the LDR as a transitional area, increase the minimum lot size in the agriculture district to have it, you know, be 4 acres, so it was used for more agricultural purposes and less subdivisions, with the goal of bringing housing subdivisions more in town. So there's a specific goal there that, you know, they wanted to achieve, and it was a big enough of an issue that they decided to amend it. I think if you wanted to update the comp plan a couple years after it was implemented, you know, all your data and analysis looking at the census would probably still be up to date. So yeah, you might only have to amend a few parts of it, but then submit the whole document again. So
Tom, did you have some institutional wisdom to add?
Thank you. Just a couple of comments. When you were talking about membership of the comp plan committee, we were very fortunate to have, I think, an exceptional chair of that committee the last time around. And that chair had some really good knowledge, being an environmental engineer, that was extremely helpful to the committee. He worked very closely with the planner. They were almost a team in leading that whole process. So I think when we get down to thinking about membership, we ought to really give a lot of consideration to who's going to chair that committee. The public input process, I thought was really well done the last time around. We had the council chambers full of people, a lot of opportunity to express opinion, and a lot of that opinion got incorporated into the final document. And finally, Sophie, you and Kyle have both referenced the state law that is kind of the foundation of comp plans. And I think it'd be helpful if we had a chance, everybody got a chance to have a copy of that.
In your background material, Tom. you might
I
want-
didn't get it,
and-
or I didn't see it.
There is a link, I believe. Let me just double check.
It is linked in that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
On the agenda.
yeah,
There's a hyperlink. State law.
what I will do though is I will reference it and email it back out, because sometimes it's easy to miss blue ink on a black background.
I did indeed. That's it for me.
Getting used to what you send. See, as a new council members, like reading what you first put, reading, knowing that those links are there, I definitely completely missed it, so.
There is a better way for me to set this up for you to have.
Although
The
Tom's been here a
information you
while and he missed it, so I guess I don't feel too bad.
And you're a technology guru.
Kyle, can you just, how does our comprehensive plan interact with state law regarding the river and wetlands and stuff like that? Do we just say we follow state law, or do we have to, in our plan, do we have to identify each area, each?
Yeah, so that's
covenant
part of,
use?
so in our inventory section, all of our natural resources will be detailed. It's all mapped out, and a lot of that data comes from the state. I'm not sure exactly how the process went last time. I imagine we take the GIS data and create our own maps. So all of that's in our comp plan. Some of it will probably need to be updated with whatever newer data sets are there. But yeah, we put in where wetlands are, where significant wildlife habitats are, but we're pulling that information from state departments and sort of putting it into our plan.
So that
As
was,
far as like goals and recommendations about protecting it, I mean, our ordinance for development projects already, it talks about following DEP rules and regulations. So unless there is a specific goal, we probably wouldn't write new policy in.
I guess, no, my worry was that the town would be required to do our own survey
Okay.
of those types of things.
No,
I
no.
think that too, so.
Wasn't the format in the comprehensive plan one of identifying challenges and opportunities? And
Yeah.
I think that was
yeah.
that was a neat way to go.
Can I just kind of maybe piggyback up on that question? When or how or have we kind of assessed, graded, maybe it's not an appropriate use of this document, but we set these goals, how do we do? I guess, as we're going in to start a new process, how do we do against the person? How do we do against the person?
So what you'll get is, or what we got before, Kyle might put his own Kyle spin on it, because this will be, it was Evan with us last time. We got a table of, this was what was recommended in the last comp plan, this is the action we took, and if we hadn't taken any action, why? Because sometimes it's because it's not a good idea. We thought it would be a great idea, but it wasn't. Or the state law changed and we can no longer do this.
Yeah, I think it's important. It'd be hard to necessarily grade a specific recommendation, and then I mean, I think a lot of things were implemented. So if you're grading it that way, a recommendation was made, we went through the process, and it was implemented. In that way, a lot of things could be a success. In a different way, I mean, some things just become outdated. So a lot of the housing conversations, a lot of the things that are being talked about now at the state level or just in individual communities or things, we've started to talk about are, much larger changes than what our existing zoning allowed and what the current comp plan recommended. So in that sense, it's more of a change in the climate than necessarily saying they initially did a poor job making a recommendation in the first place. That recommendation was based off of community feedback and kind of best practices at the time, but a lot changed over a decade. To maybe that same recommendation now might be something entirely different.
I get that, and that makes sense, and that's why obviously 12 years later, lots has changed, obviously. But I am interested if there is a way to look at outcomes more so than yes, we said this and we implemented it. What does that mean? I'd be interested in outcomes personally, but
If you want to
to the extent where that
the
fits.
next, or for the last few years, or since we adopted the council work plan process, part of that has included kind of a, how did we do on our work plan? And so the comp plan work that we've done each year on our work plans. So like, at least for the last, how
So
many
the
years
work
have we been
plan-
doing a work plan? 4 years, 3 years? So at least for those years, we already have a little bit of a rough draft, a preview of the comp plan goals that we've addressed.
I think some of that too would come in the next, when we're starting to get into the next comp plans, inventory and analysis, and we're diving into census data and all. So the comp plan now, you look at volume of wine and you look at housing or income levels, and you see what those numbers are. And then it creates all of these issues or concerns based off of that inventory. It's saying, you know, okay, we need to lower the minimum lot size in the MDR because we don't have enough dwelling units in the town, or housing, home prices are too high, people can't afford it. So that's, you know, the basis of the recommendations to create conditions where people can develop more housing. If we do the inventory now and we see that, you know, those numbers are still the same, we can look back and say, okay, well, maybe the recommendations weren't strong enough. We didn't create enough of an environment where people could create those extra homes.
And that exercise you just described seems like a pretty healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
So otherwise, we plan and then we plan again and then we plan again.
Right, and that's the first step of the, so once that committee was formed and it started meeting, that would be the first step, is to collect all that data. And that's, you have to have that as the first step of the comp plan to make, that's the basis of all the recommendations you create. You're identifying all of your potential issues and concerns off of that data.
I guess I was seeing that as being a completely new process, like, because today's concerns might not have been those concerns. So did we address those concerns? But I think I understand what you're saying. I appreciate it.
So.
Yeah, that was.
Okay. So the goal today was to drop the bomb of comp planning. Yep. it's like a
Warning.
mic drop, right? So that you begin to think a little bit about it. Kyle, I don't know if folks are aware, but Kyle is going to be transitioning in the next couple of months to remote work, and has committed to seeing us through this process. So we're not going to see him for a little bit, and he will pop back up when he is ready to re-engage. At that point, we're going to want to start having more substantial conversations about what does the committee kind of look like, because that is kind of the first step. And also, for example, I've already started to put out feelers for like the president of the land trust and people that pretty obviously would want, if not to be part of the committee, to have substantial input into elements of the committee. But it is, we're asking for a huge commitment, so it's not a favor I can just call and say, hey, would you do this?
Hey, what are you doing for the next 2 years?
Exactly, exactly. So I think that's the first step, and we also wanted to make sure you were ready to embark on this. I think Kyle has put a pretty nice timeline in front of us. He's doing research now on some of the elements that he hasn't had to work with, like a more robust, engaging citizen process, not just an email out. We have to get creative. Hopefully we've got a good team of people here who can help us be creative. So I didn't have any action steps out of this unless your action was no, wait one more year.
Cancel it.
Um,
Jokes. Thank you. Well, let's move to item 2B then, which is overview of the contract / conditional zoning process.
Well, I was wrong that I was wrong. I was right.
Okay, some sort of zoning process and plan development at 5 College Ave.
So I think we're gonna start with Mitch.
So first, I'd like to just publicly thank Kyle, because as much as he gives you guys all this wonderful stuff like this last conversation, he does that daily with us in the office. And it means, I mean, every business opportunity, every code enforcement thing that we go through somehow ties back to our ordinances, which he's the guru. So we really look to him to help us through this process. So publicly, I'd like to thank him for all his work he does, because it's really important to us being successful. So, so we wanted to come back here next week on Wednesday. Tyler Technologies is coming before you to talk about a contract zone. And I know when talking to Sophie, there's not a huge time frame there. So we wanted to try to give a little bit of information up front for you, for some folks that weren't here before and haven't heard any of this, give you the opportunity to ask some questions. My role in this is really to talk a little bit about the project, a little bit bigger, bigger picture stuff. And then Kyle's going to talk a little bit about the process of contract zone, and then we can ask some questions. But basically, Tyler Technology bought the university in property back in December. They are looking to create an office here next to the university. In this conversation, there actually was a big deal. When I heard this, I've been working with Tyler on the fringes of looking for property in Oreno. And this all tied back to number of conversations I've had with the university regarding looking at ways in which we could attract business that were connected in some way to the university. We do have several businesses that are positioned here in Orono because of the workforce, and do a lot of internships with the university. And that's been a goal of the university as well, is to provide more local internships so kids don't have to go to Portland in the summer or do those sorts of things. So basically, through those conversations, we had talked a little bit about this kind of idea of small remote offices for companies to come up here and have internship space. And then all of a sudden, Tyler shows up with this idea that they want to build an office space, want to have 75 jobs, want to bring basically an industry that is young people, young professionals, which attaches to our comprehensive plan and trying to attract those, and looking at ways to connect and partner with the university. They have purchased, like I said, they have purchased that property. They are looking to take down the building that's there and build something new, because that doesn't meet their needs, which would in turn have them looking at a contract zone so that they can do what needs to be done there. Currently, it is the MDR, and it's a legally non-conforming use with the inn being there. So looking to make that a conforming use is important to them so that they can take that over. They are positioned, they're a national company out of Texas. They do have 2 offices. They have an office in Bangor currently, which they would close down, and their employees would come to Oreno. They have an office in Falmouth and Yarmouth. They plan to work very closely with the university on not only internships but other initiatives in the tech space, and are very interested in the workforce development and getting people engaged early on so that they can work in a very challenging world of workforce right now. So that's kind of a high level look at what they are looking to do there. Their attraction is the location, is the fact that you're going to drive by there to get to the university, and every kid's going to see it. And they're well aware of what that means in a community like this, and they're very interested in being part of the community process.
I think one of the elements that was really interesting to me is why they wanted to come to Oreno. There was the element of being right at the gateway to all these potential employees, which they, like everybody else, are really struggling to retain good employees, or recruit good employees. It was also the fact that they identified Oreno as having a quality of life that their current employees were asking for. Their current employees want to live somewhere where they can commute in an alternative way to work. They want to be somewhere where they can easily partake of outdoor activities and all of the things that we are trying to brand Oreno for. So I am excited with the combination with Humane. I hope that they'll put some Humane paraphernalia on the outside of their building to announce that we are the home of the University of Maine, which is always a good thing. But I think that their interest in the community really came through in our conversations.
The other thing I would say is they actually have 2 locations that are in college communities. One is in Ann Arbor in Michigan, and one is in College Station at Texas A&M. They're not anywhere as visible as this. They're in, they happen to be in the city, but they're not necessarily right at the gateway. So they've looked at this model as well throughout the country. So I think that's important. But I agree with what Sophie said, is they are very interested in being engaged in our community as well, and look at the quality. That I think one of the things they mentioned was it'd be great to have people be able to just walk downtown, get a bite to eat at lunch and things like that. So be engaged.
Good opportunity for a great company, there's established company. Choose the contract, it's phenomenal. I don't know why I was thinking that they were gonna somehow use that building, but that's even more exciting.
Hey, Leo,
New building. Hey, am I not talking loud enough?
you are not, and you're kind of talking away from the owl. So if you could, are
I was just
interested in
saying,
what you
an
have to say.
Yeah, just an incredible opportunity. This company I've known for a long time. It is one of the main companies that is stopping the brain drain in the state. It used to be Munis, as most people probably know, down in Falmouth. So really excited that they've chosen to come here, and I just think it's an amazing opportunity for Oreno. So really excited.
So that's the background of what is going to happen. And understanding that whatever happens there will have to go through a planning board process to be built, not to be demoed. Demoed is a permit through the code enforcement officer. We made it through April 1st, so the tax bill will be for what is standing on April 1st, which is a good thing. And we are trying to facilitate a process that, number one, facilitates their need to get up and going as quickly as possible. They just made a substantial investment in this property, but also the more we can get constructed before April 1st of next year, the better it is for the town. I mean, so knowing that things like traffic movement and impact on the environment and the other 13 steps that are part of the site development process will all go before the planning board. Those are, council has already established an ordinance that they have to follow there. The question now is, it's in MDR. So Kyle is working with Tyler and will be working with Tyler to create a contract zone. And I want him to walk you through that. So we don't have a draft contract. We hope to have a very high level draft for you for the 13th. But normally when we come before council, we spend the first half of the meeting doing what Mitch just did and what Kyle's going to do now. We're trying to give that to you a week early so that you can talk about the contract next time.
So we've done a couple of smaller contract zone agreements since I've been here, but these were pretty small and the restrictions put in place were pretty minor. There's actually an existing contract zone agreement for the property, but it was only for the piece by the river in the shoreland zone area of that lot. And it was so that they could put the gazebo had a closer setback to the water than what their existing shoreland zone allowed at the time. So I think we would be able to just amend that existing contract to include the whole lot, not just that shoreland piece. But so what a contract zone does is it changes the underlying zone of the lot. So that lot's MDR. So the first step would be to pick a new zoning district that would allow them to do whatever base activity they want to do. So they want an office. So for us, it would make sense to either rezone that as village commercial or commercial too, because both of those districts allow what they're looking to do there. In talking with them, most likely what would get recommended is village commercial, because that will give them more flexibility, and it gives the town more flexibility, I think, to look at more progressive transportation options. This is something we can get into more at the next meeting, but as we've talked about before, businesses in the village commercial aren't required to have a minimum number of parking spaces. This is an area where we don't want to encourage vehicular traffic. You want less traffic there, encouraging more walkability, more bikeability.
Or busability.
Right, it's on the route where the shuttle and community connector is already in that area. We should be advocating for people working here to use those sorts of things, use our infrastructure, do all the things we talk about. So requiring them to have a higher number of minimum parking spaces is not ideal there. You're just creating more impervious surface and wasted space, really, when we could be advocating and encouraging something a lot better, I think. That could be better for the surrounding residential areas too. So anyway, that's, that first step is really nailing down what the recommended new zoning district would be. And from there, the contract document kind of pulls back on what would normally be allowed in that zone. So the village commercial allows any number of uses, from hotels to gas stations to bars to whatever. So typically in a contract, you make some sort of statement that the only allowable use there is whatever the proposed use is. And maybe the uses that are currently allowed in the MDR, because the surrounding area is MDR. So you want them to be able to do whatever it is they're proposing, but you want to protect from future development. Maybe someone comes in with some crazy idea that doesn't necessarily fit that area where it's surrounded by residential uses.
I mean, like a bar
Right.
That would, like, if you allowed them to be a bar, then the next lot up is the service station that's currently for sale. So if you were to stretch bars here, then there's the argument that why can't you just stretch it to Murray's? And Murray's is right around a bunch of other people that might have some major issue with them.
So yeah, typically there's, the first restriction made in those contracts is a statement about the allowed uses. So whether, the contract would just allow offices or allow offices and a few other identifiable uses that the council would agree that, no matter who came forward in the future, whatever property owner was there, these few things would be okay. But the important part is really to make sure that what they're proposing is allowed. The village commercial, if that was the zone, the base zone that we went with, already has design standards that has a max building footprint of 15,000 square feet. So which kind of fits in line with, what they're talking about and what the existing hotel is. So I think it makes sense there. But the contract allows you to put in things, regarding setbacks and buffers and, building height and signage and all those sort of dimensional and aesthetic type standards to make sure that the project blends in with the surrounding area, to whatever extent that the council would want it to. So from their perspective, the development has to go through two phases. There's the contract zone agreement, which ultimately is approved by council, but has to go through a planning board public hearing as well. And just like every land use ordinance revision, the planning board makes a recommendation, then sends it back to council, and the council adopts it. So contract zones go through the same process. Starts here in committee, it goes to planning board for a public hearing. The planning board looks at it and says, yep, this contract zone agreement makes sense with our current comp plan. It fits in with our existing zoning and land use ordinance. We recommend it forward to the council for approval. The other piece of this is their current development project has to be reviewed by the planning board. That piece is just reviewed by the planning board, not the council. So they'll go through the normal site plan review process, look at stormwater management, erosion control, traffic, access, any of the lot dimensional requirements, for the district, all of that. Generally, those two things, the contract zone and the site plan, are looked at around the same time, ideally at the same meeting, but the way that the timelines work, it might be one is reviewed right before the other. And that's so that the scope of the project can tie directly into the contract. So you're making relevant restrictions or requirements in the contract that apply directly to the actual plan that they're putting forward. You don't want to put have them come forward with a development plan, have the planning board say, yep, we approve this on a conditional basis, and then you bring the contract forward, and the council says, well, oh no, we want to add this new restriction into the contract, and they have to go back and edit all of their development plans and go back to the planning board. So ideally, they go through the process at the same time. Yeah, so in the next week or so, I'll be putting together a draft contract zone agreement with some of the bigger picture requirements, provisions that make sense, talking about switching the zone, the allowable uses, abiding by certain development standards to, for instance, village commercial doesn't allow, or doesn't have any setback requirement. As this is surrounded entirely by NPR, which does have a setback requirement, there's probably not a desire to have the Tyler office building go directly up to the property line and abut someone's backyard. Things like that are pretty obvious and can be put in right away. But then at the meeting next week, we'd be able to, I think, look at some of their concept plans, look at the rough draft contract, and council would be able to offer any bigger picture feedback before it goes to the planning board.
So in your background, I said we were gonna ask if we could deviate from our guidelines. So this is where the deviation comes in. And Kyle and I can't decide to do that. You've got to kind of bless it, or else we go right back to your guidelines. In the past, we have been able to come to you with a complete final draft contract before it goes to the planning board. In order to meet the planning board process, when I look at your schedule coming up and we're going to move into double meetings, there is really no room for me to bring back a contract, a fully complete contract zone. So it doesn't mean that you are approving it. However, our hope is that you would see the draft, give us substantial feedback. And as long as we stayed within kind of the substantive framework that we've given to you, that you would allow that draft to go to the planning board. We would revise it, of course, but it would go to the planning board and then come back to you.
I was just
after
gonna say,
that.
it comes back to us.
It has to come back to you. You have to hold your own public hearing on it. And then you have to wait 30 days. It's considered a contract zone the process is exactly the same as a land use ordinance. So you have final say. Just in trying to weave it all in, I'm afraid we'd be in like August before we could work, before we could have it go through, and I'm afraid that will slow down a lot of the construction in there. I think hoping to break ground in September. So hoping, and I'm hoping to have good tax dollars, which requires them starting hoping in September. But if you're not comfortable with that, we could either agree that we're gonna hold another special meeting later down the road, or that we would slow down the process. But we wanted to get this in front of you so that we could be open with Tyler about what the schedule would look like.
I think I don't have immediate reservations about amending the process, but I do think it would be important to allow public participation and the public to have a voice if there are folks who have concerns and wanted to voice those at a meeting sooner in the process rather than later. So I wonder if there will be an opportunity for citizen input at next week's meeting, for example.
And we can do it at the planning board meeting.
Okay.
So the purpose of the planning board is to hold a public hearing.
Okay.
And then that feedback comes back to us with a recommendation from the planning board. And then you work it, depending on what the feedback is. You would then hold your own public hearing and you get more feedback. In terms of opportunity for people to speak, that is so not my bailiwick. That is yours.
Yeah.
I would say what I've been told by counselors is there is an hour that I have between 4:30 and 5:30. When I have everybody available here. I think it would be important. I think one of the things Tyler's going to be looking for is the feeling from the council that in general, there is consistency and stability here for them to move forward. I think what staff is going to be looking for is, in general, what are the things you're trying to accomplish with this contract zone? Are there things that Kyle has put in here that you're not comfortable with? The legalese part, it actually, a contract zone goes through Kyle, it goes through me, and then it goes to the town attorney. So we don't have to be experts in the legalese necessarily, but it has to accomplish what council wants it to accomplish.
I don't have any reservations about amending the process slightly. I think that's all very reasonable, and we'll have ample opportunity to look at it when it's complete. The planning board will give us the recommendations. There'll be multiple opportunities for public input. We should not delay the process unnecessarily.
And through the planning board meeting, we'll notify the butters directly. So it's not a situation where they have to check some online or paper, or at least in certain proximity, the butters get notified directly.
So I have no problem modifying the process as long as the final contract that goes to the planning board is within the general framework that we see. If there were dramatic changes in what we see next week and what goes to the planning board, then I think I might have some reservations. But the way Kyle described it, it would be within the general framework that we see on Wednesday. And if that's the case, then I'm fine with it.
I really want to see this project move forward as quickly as possible, but I want to remind myself, I guess, that when we talked to Tyler the first time, they were very supportive of allowing public access to the riverfront, and I'd like that to be documented or somehow included in our contract.
No reservations. Seems like I think a really good approach that you've come up with, and I appreciate you being cognizant of the April deadlines. I think that's very relevant, and also acknowledging, Oreno has a reputation for not being supportive of these sorts of things. And personally, I've defended the reputation. It hasn't, I've never seen it really at the council level. Neighborhoods can spark up and do things, but many occasions downtown where people are like, yeah, Oreno, I'm like, it's not the council. I think the council has always been pretty supportive of development in the way that we want development done. And I think being consistent with that is important, and I'm certain we will be. So I want to be business friendly. I don't like that reputation at all for Oreno. So I no reservations about the process.
I agree with that sentiment. I also do want to remind myself that this is going to be a big change, and big changes sometimes evoke big feelings. So I think that we should prepare for the public to have a lot of feelings about the building coming down and what might go up there. And I don't know if that will manifest in the upcoming 2 hearings, but it will certainly manifest as we move through this process over the next few months. So I want to respect the fact that this is going to be a big change for the community, and that there might be some big voices.
Yeah, and I agree and see that wisdom. And in that vein, I wonder if it's council's bailiwick to be thinking about how and when to invite public participation and comment. Is there a time for public comments on next week's meeting? And if there isn't, could we add that? I don't think it would add a lot of length to the meeting, and I think it would provide another outlet for people who might have feelings to just have an outlet to express them when we're early in the process and haven't, wasted a lot of time.
So I'm still working with Tom and Megan. I have not started, but I have to work with them to figure out, is this, if this is a workshop or if this is a comp plan implementation committee. Structurally for council, that really doesn't, everybody's invited and everybody participates, but for the chairs, it's 2 different things. I'd be happy to talk with them. The only time that we formally have public comment on an agenda is for the regular business meeting. Having said that, council, the committee chairs and the council chair will oftentimes know in advance kind of the parameters that they're willing to kind of open it up to. And sometimes it is a set of priorities. The first priority is to talk to Tyler. The second priority is to make sure staff gets everything they need to move the process forward. The third priority is to give whatever time we get left to public comment. Other times it's a set amount of time. It depends. If there are
It'd be
2 people,
tricky with, we have an hour, right?
we have an hour. If there were 1 person online and 1 person in council chambers, that can change. When you've got 30 people in council chambers and 20 people online, sometimes opening up a committee meeting, the public hearing can kind of derail the process a little bit. I think that that's something that council needs to decide. And for this particular time, I will kind of, the process would be for me to defer to whoever's running the meeting.
Can I ask, have abutter letters gone out at this point to abutters? Because that's, I mean, I appreciate the sentiment and down the back of it, I'm so excited, but.
I'm excited too, Leo.
and
Don't
it
get me
will.
wrong. I'm
You're
excited
right, changes change. I mean, to me, this feels like a lesser use, but it's gonna be change, and so you're right, that always does spur excitement on both ways.
Letters will go out once we have the application and know what meeting it's going to get.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about like, who already knows what's going on, and are we likely to get 50 people showing up, or is it gonna be 2 people show up that wanna talk? But that's, again, I guess you just discussed, that's for Tom.
Frequently, the
Megan.
BDN is
What's that?
frequently the BDN's observing these meetings, and this, for all we know, could end up in the paper.
It has also been,
Sawyer? No, I'm just kidding.
it's also been in the paper. There's been several articles about this back when it sold.
Yeah.
Where it came from.
So the official application for a planning board meeting has to be in a month before that planning board meeting. So then we advertise in the paper, we state regulations around noticing,
10
and
days
then,
before.
yeah, and then we send out the postcards to abutters, letting them know, and it has a link to access the actual plans and application. So a few weeks leading up to the planning board meeting, they would be able to review the application itself with any building construction plans. And they can email comment to staff ahead of time, ask any questions, or they can come to the planning board meeting and speak at the meeting. And
Or they can Zoom in
Right.
and speak
and
that way.
at that point, it's sometimes easier to wait to then, I think, to make comment, because there's actually something to comment on versus commenting on a building that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
A lot of people have, it's usually similar concerns. It's things that the planning board reviews. It's traffic, it's drainage issues, noise, lighting, all those sorts of things, which are usually addressed they should be at some capacity in the planning board application. So not that people can't ask those questions early, but waiting to that point, where that stuff can be reviewed and then comment.
Thank you.
What are the odds we can convince them to build it as a replica of Ebenezer Webster's mansion that used to be there before the hotel? It would look very cool, I'm just saying. Okay, well, do you need anything more from us on this?
So as soon as we have draft documents, we will get them out. I'm not making any promises when that will be, because Kyle is kind of at the mercy of Tyler. So if Tyler completely, if Tyler is really late, then you might get something from me saying, this was a great idea to have a meeting, but we're gonna have to postpone because Kyle's not ready. We are trying to line ourselves up to be as responsive as we can. So it will be hot off the press when we get it.
That's good.
Hot off the electric.
Yeah, that thing.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Kyle. So moving on, I will turn this over to the chair of the Finance and Operations Committee so we can discuss cybersecurity. Tom, you're on mute.
Hopefully this is the last meeting I'll have to do this for a while. We have one item on our agenda, and that is enhancing cybersecurity in Oreno.
Hi, everybody. So we are kind of working through our insurance renewal and our budget process, and thought that perhaps it might be time to come talk to council a little bit more about cybersecurity and what the need is. I apologize. Apparently I have accessibility turned on, so you're going to see a description of what you're going to what's being seen on the screen as well. So just a little bit of background into the cybersecurity world and where the town is and where we've been. The town is has been meeting requirements from the insurance company and has been doing the best that they could with the resources that we had. And that is, not certified professional cybersecurity analysts at your employ. But in recent years, the cybersecurity has become more and more important. We've seen ransomware attacks on water treatment plants in Maine. We've seen it on small municipalities in Maine. So it's become a closer and closer threat. And then also, particularly with the war in Ukraine, there have been an increase in bad actors trying to make attacks on pretty much anybody who is available, particularly government entities. Some of the warnings that we've received have been from our law firm, and we've gotten some from our insurance company, and we've gotten some from the emergency management that comes straight from the federal emergency management and works its way through the state and the county. So a quick overview, you'll actually notice that I am borrowing a presentation from Tyler Technologies. This particular consulting group that they have is down in Yarmouth, but they have laid out some statistics here that cybersecurity, we spent $5 trillion trying to prevent damage, but that there's been $10.5 trillion or they're expecting $10.5 trillion annually in damages per year. So we don't want to be caught up in that net. Ransomware costs are expected to continue rising every year. We continue to digitize our data and our systems and our processes, which means that in some ways we're more accessible for our they require, but in other ways it means that we are kind of putting our sensitive information out there online and trying to protect it as best as we can. So after kind of reviewing our current status and what we have and where we want to be, I reached out to our insurance company. Our insurance company suggested that there were 2 firms in the state of Maine who have significant familiarity with municipalities. Unfortunately, municipalities are not kind of a cookie cutter cybersecurity client. We're not exactly like a hospital or a bank or something like that. We've got a lot of different systems that we integrate with the state, with the voter system, with our motor vehicle. So we're integrated with places that we don't control. And that raises some additional concerns, and it means that you should use a consultant who is familiar with how things work. So there's kind of a 3-pronged approach to cybersecurity. We have the people. People need to be aware of what's going on. You have planning and processes so that you are prepared for what might occur and that your processes are safe, and that you also have some technology in place to protect you. And so they have kind of a base progression of where people might be and how secure you might be. So for people, some of the greatest threats to your cybersecurity come through social engineering. So if you have users who are willing to click on any unexpected invoice that might be misspelled, or you might have somebody who says, I have $1 million waiting in the bank. All I need for you to do is to transfer $100 so I have your bank account information. If you have people who are willing to follow those paths, then you have a wide open system. So the town of Oreno has done a reasonable job of educating users, of kind of testing their awareness, and kind of trying to keep up that training over the years. So we're at a kind of a managed level for this in this progression. For programs, we have we're aware we've got to establish basic processes and policies. A lot of what we know and how we would respond to threats is held in the brains, not necessarily on the paper. So what we need to do is truly formalize this and make sure that we are proof against, somebody gets hit by the bus. That's if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, would we still be able to respond to a threat? So we're a little bit better than basic, but we're not quite at the managed level or replicated, which is really, I think, where the town can operate well. And then as far as technology, again, we are aware. We've got some basic controls, we've got oversight, we've got documentation on what it is that we do, but we could do a whole lot better in protecting our systems by doing more monitoring and active threat response. Does anybody have any questions, or are you guys all glazed over your teeny tiny little boxes? So I can't tell if you're on top of it or if you need me to slow down. So
Yep.
what was there a question?
No, we said carry on.
Oh, okay, sorry. So there are two different proposals that two complementary proposals that I am presenting to council today to find out kind of what your willingness is to move forward. One is a 24/7 monitoring and detection program. This would be all computers that the town owns and controls would be monitored. And while they have Microsoft 365 on here, they're also rolling out Google integration as well. So it would give us automated alerts for suspicious activity, viruses that may be taking over computers that we don't necessarily see right away because a user hasn't noticed a difference yet. They would be able to disable that infected machine as soon as a threat was detected, so that we would have the opportunity to eliminate it before it kind of migrated through the whole system. They would give us a documented audit trail for compliance so that we would be able to show our insurance company that we are indeed following best practices and doing what we can to clean things up. And then a good portal that kind of shows us what's happening and where current threats are coming from and how we might be able to respond to them.
Well,
yes.
are you going to give me this presentation so that I can get it out to folks after the meeting? Because I see some folks furiously writing.
Yes, I will certainly send this out. I got it kind of late from Tyler. They gave it to me. They presented it last week, so we'll get it to you.
Continue on.
Okay, so the complement to that, so that's kind of a technology solution in place. The complement to that is a professional services contract with Tyler, where they have professionals who do this all day, every day, and only this, to develop policies, procedures, and planning to help us, kind of proof ourselves against the wayward bus. They develop education and training, so it's not just training that might be coming from me or our IT staff, but coming from an outside firm, which sometimes tends to have a little more impact. And then they would also look at our whole system and then help us prioritize how to approach all the different planning documents and where our biggest risks are and how to move forward in I don't want to say coming into compliance, because we're not out of compliance, but employing more best management practices as we move forward. A second piece that they offer is this testing and assessment idea. So not only will they kind of evaluate just by looking at what you have, but they also actively try to test your system to find out if there are vulnerabilities that you just aren't aware of. And that can help you proactively remedy those issues. Again, as I mentioned, social engineering is a concern. Penetration testing is also a concern, considering how many different systems we integrate with that are outside of our control. Tyler has, for the past several years, been putting together a packaged approach. There's usually only so many tasks and plans and programming that municipalities are able to handle each year, particularly smaller ones. So they have a package where they put together this cybersecurity awareness, and where they have managed detection and response on all of these. Really all that is a 2-week trial, not the full year-round service. So there's 3 different levels. I think the middle level is the rate program for the town of Oreno if council were to choose to move forward with this. It allows us to start building our programs, but our one critical component is that quarterly advisor call. And that quarterly advisor call is with experts that help you prioritize and remedy your risks. So Avi and I are capable of doing tasks if we are assigned and if we're told what we need to do and how to kind of the steps in order to do those tasks. But with this kind of level of support, we would have guidance and assistance and direction on what those tasks should be, how to do them, and where to get additional information on creating some of these additional plans. So that is what I have for kind of a programmed discussion. But if there are questions that anybody might have. Sophie, is there additional information you want me to provide?
In a few minutes, we're going to talk about money, but let's talk
Oh,
about
yes. Questions?
My main question is what's our exposure, but it sounds like we don't know that is what I think I heard in there.
Probably we wouldn't want to talk about that.
I know, I know, it's a public meeting.
Yeah, where exactly are the?
Yeah.
We're bulletproof.
Well, but just kind of thinking through what I don't know, I guess, about it, it doesn't seem like we would have a lot of proprietary information as a public entity. Maybe that's completely off base, but I could see, I mean.
So I think what I could tell you is that,
You'd have to kill me.
no, I think what I could tell you is what we have seen other municipalities and wastewater systems go through. It's not so much proprietary information that people are trying to get, rather it's what you operate on. And if you can't access what you operate on, that is a risk.
What do you mean?
They hold it for ransom. So like they'll take control of some aspect of your system and you're locked out of it and you have to pay to get access back, and there's not much that anybody can do to help you.
So for example, Leo, a small wastewater system up in northern Maine was held by ransomware, and they were locked out of their SCADA system. So we've had the conversation about how we're going to update the SCADA and what it does, and it controls all the pumps and the alarms and prevents or makes it so that we don't have to have an operator on site for, 24/7 monitoring each individual pump manually. So they were locked out of their SCADA and could not control their wastewater system for a while. I also would kind of remind you about when you come to the front desk, you might pay by credit card. And those are not internal systems. We hire that out, but we integrate with it. We integrate with the voter registration system. So we integrate with driver's license information. We integrate with the vital records. So
that was another kind of question, because I believe the voter system, voter data is not ours, I think, right? Because I'm talking about getting that. It seems like that's state data. License information is probably not ours. So we integrate with it. My assumption would be that they are the ones responsible for locking it down and securing it.
but if somebody gets into our, I feel a little nervous about saying this, but if somebody gets into our network and social engineers passwords out of people, then all they need to do is use our passwords to get into those systems. So while we are not the holder of that database, we are the, we have access into it, which means that we need to make sure that our systems are secure enough to prevent people from getting access through us.
It seems like that makes a lot of sense, and it also seems like this is not a something that is unique to Oreno. I'm sure that most towns are having these conversations. Do you have a sense of what other towns are doing and to what extent it is perceived at the state level as the town's responsibility to be foraying into these waters?
So I can tell you that our insurance company spent months on developing the cyber assessment for our insurance renewal, and it was 7 pages of questions. So our insurance company is really trying to get a handle on what level each community is at and what risk level each one presents to the insurance pool. So it's not 100% known, but I can guarantee you that everybody who has gone through that cyber assessment and had to mark off no on more than half the questions is probably having this conversation. We did not have to mark off no on more than half the questions. I just want to be clear about that, but.
So the insurance, I've been through this several times with the insurance company over the last 2 decades. When a new issue comes up, for a while it was in the fire department, do you have these things in place? The first couple of cycles, they're giving you the opportunity to see you're checking off no, and perhaps you need to do something better. Oftentimes they would be able to provide the guidance and the support to bring you up to the best practice. With this particular issue, that was the first place we called. They don't have that capability to do it internally, so they're sending us to the 2 consultants that they know have been working with municipalities and have the internal piece. Eventually, that stopped being a questionnaire and became part of the insurability and rate establishment. So if we don't have the best practice in place, even if we're protecting ourselves in an informal way, if we can't check those boxes in another couple of years, that is going to show as a risk on our insurance. I mean, we see that with the sewer questionnaire that they have. That is no longer just think about how often you're cleaning your lines. That is now, if we don't clean our lines in their framework, we are paying a higher premium, and premium is expensive. Now, I'm not sure it's as expensive as what we will pay for consulting services, but I think one of the things Belle and I are suggesting is that we look at this in 1 year increments, meaning what we need right now, we might not need a year from now. We might have enough best practice in place and know our stuff. I'm not ever going to suggest that we need a full-time cybersecurity person on staff. I think that this is something that will come in waves that we can buy the service much cheaper than what we could pay to have it done.
From what I've read, the threats are opportunistic. That means Oreno is not targeted because it's Oreno. Oreno is targeted because it's weaker than some other town. So it's not necessary that we have the gold standard in protection. It's only necessary that we be slightly more protected than the weakest person, which is terrible to say. But
You're on your own, Community X. Hope you get attacked.
but I'll leave that there. But it's
Yeah, I'm curious about the cost.
So hang on to something,
What was that?
hang on to something, whatever, just hang on to it. All right.
Yeah, no, okay. That's fine. The other question that's just like bouncing around in my head is identifying suspicious activity, what that looks like. What is the employee experience of that kind of surveillance? Like, just what does that look like? How intrusive is it into the employee experience in the town?
So it is, because that was one of the first questions I had, because of course, one of the difficulties with many antivirus programs is that it slows down a system incredibly and makes it difficult for somebody to operate. They said that this is a very minimal intrusion. It does not affect the user's processor speed or anything like that. And it just runs very quietly in the background and only pops up if there is an active virus or threat detected.
So do you mean like around privacy?
I think that's part of it.
Okay, so anybody using any technology, one of the first things they learn when they come to Oreno is not to expect any privacy. Things like cameras, I don't think like we're thinking about spying on people at all. But in terms of keystrokes and stuff like that, the goal here would not be to be picking up information, but like that level of privacy. But anything that goes out over town, that lands in the computer or out over the towns, I would say airwaves, but we know it's not airwaves, but you know what I'm talking about. There is a very clear and definite expectation that people do not have privacy.
Yeah. So like right now, of course, town employees, they're operating with town equipment. They, and they know that anything that they're doing, their correspondences are monitorable. How often are they being monitored? And with this change, how often they're monitored? I mean, just like that still does affect people's sense of comfort and like ease in their workplace.
So the monitoring is not looking at the details of what somebody might be writing in an email or a document or something like that. What they're looking at is are emails going out to Russian addresses, for example, or are they coming in from high threat countries? Has somebody made the attempt to log into Google from, say, Spain, when normally they are, at 59 Main Street? It's not looking at the details of the work, but at kind of the paths and the activities that are occurring. Does that make sense?
Well, that's all very helpful information. I just, it was just something was bouncing around in my head, but this all sounds very reasonable. It is funny that it's Tyler Technologies that we're being presented.
So you
Yeah,
had
is this a
mentioned
trick?
there were two consulting companies who had been recommended by the insurance. Did you meet with the other as well and consider other options, or have we only looked at Tyler so far?
So I tried. I asked the insurance company for contact information for both companies. I could not find the second company, and Tyler didn't have contact, or sorry, the insurance company didn't have contact information for either company. I tried to find the second company. I could not find them online. I couldn't find a presence for Maine Municipal Insurance or cybersecurity consultant. I couldn't find them. I happened to have purchased my house from a director at Tyler Technology, and I reached out to him and asked him if he had a contact for the cyber security group with Tyler. And that's how I got through to Tyler. As I mentioned, Tyler, or actually, I think you guys mentioned earlier, Tyler is a very large company, and they are growing this Maine Municipal Group kind of word of mouth to start with.
Tyler is also on Sourcewell. Do you want to talk a little bit about Sourcewell?
So Sourcewell is kind of a consolidation site that presents contracts that have been approved as being kind of best value, and for companies that offer additional either additional discounts or have been approved by other government entities as being responsive to an RFP. So it's kind of a consolidation hub for approved vendors for all sorts of things, from paving to park benches to IT services. And the head of the cyber security group told me that they are on Sourcewell, so have been approved to work with governmental entities.
We ready to go on to the money?
So the monitoring and detection program is $10,000 a year. It doesn't matter how many systems we put online. It is kind of it's based on the size of the municipality, and we fall into their smallest category. So that would be an ongoing expense every year. The consultant package that I am recommending is $25,000 for the year. The lower level of consulting services is $10,000 a year. As Sophie mentioned, we are talking about trying to take this on a year-by-year approach so that we are getting into place our best management practices and programs and plans that we need in order to move forward, and then evaluate those to see if we have the in-house expertise to continue to keep them updated and implemented without needing to hire out that professional oversight to do that. I spoke with the sales consultant and asked about prorating, because if we wanted to get started right away with either the monitoring or the working on some of our plans and programs. And he said that they would be willing to just write the contract from whenever we agree to do it to June 30 of the next year, so that it would be slightly more than a year for the two services.
So Bill, what you're recommending is a $35,000 a year package.
Yes.
Okay.
Sophie, do you want me to mention what it's eligible for or not yet?
Go for it.
Now you have to.
I I am not super thrilled about using this, but go ahead.
Yes, so, and for good reason, this funding is eligible for the ARPA money. One thing that we have kind of laid out that we did not want to do with ARPA money was start programs that would require investment every year once that ARPA money ran out. So that is one reason why I am suggesting that we not look at this as a multi-year commitment at this time. The other reason why you may not wish to spend ARPA funds on this is that you know, we have many infrastructure needs and concerns, and of course could have spent this money up over about 3 or 4 times already. But it is one of the approved ARPA expenses to harden and protect against cybersecurity threats.
Hmm.
Well, it's unusual for us to be making a decision about a pretty sizable expense without competing bids. And I understand that there are obviously things out of our control in that process, but it's a strange position to be in.
So I have no issue with, so I brought this to your attention because there's a timely issue that we, I think, need to deal with. I have no problem if there are 2 vendors in Maine to try to work a little bit more to find the second vendor and asking for a quote for the same kind of level of service. Whichever one comes in, we know one of them, whichever one meets the same need with the same kind of references. I don't have an issue with that. What I don't want to do is bring something to a council agenda that you guys have not generally talked about, and we're going into a dark phase on committee meetings where you're not having very many of them, you're having budget workshops. And I think one of the things that Belle and I were hoping is if you want to move forward with this, July 1 probably is not when we want to start. We want to try to get as much out of this as we possibly can.
Meaning as many sort of like extra months on the year contract.
That and to also enhance privilege.
Yes.
So Sophie, having listened to you talk about this year's budget, I'm not sure I would see any place in this year's budget where you would find an uncommitted $35,000 at this point in time.
No, I'm
So-
still trying
So the
to,
invoice would come July 1.
Oh, okay,
so
gotcha.
in this year's budget, regardless of, in this year's budget, we have $135,000 left in the overlay account. When we look at the budget adjustments we've taken out of it and the expenses that have been taken out of it. We have 2 pending abatement requests that one of them would not be taken out of overlay. The other one would. Based on what we're seeing, we think that the town put a really good value on the housing complex. And we've looked at it twice. So I don't think there's a huge risk, but it's my crystal ball, and my crystal ball isn't always right. So other than that, we have no other planned expenses out of the overlay account. So $35,000 could potentially come out of that, looking at potentially a $10,000 addition to next year's budget to fund an ongoing payment if we needed to, or skip this next year and the year after that. I am a little bit concerned about tapping ARPA for things like this, because this is an ongoing commitment. It's also small, and we really need to have a conversation about what we want to do with that money. I'm also concerned that the second payment of ARPA might not be guarantee. We've been told we're gonna get $1 million. We've gotten 500,000 thus far. We've spent about 120 of it. Or we've allocated about 120 of it. There are still projects that we want to talk about that really are not ongoing kind of building operations. And I mean, you can look at this two ways. Yes, this is an additional expense, but is it a process that we should probably have anyway? And I'm hoping that after this year, we'll get it down to that 10,000 level. But I can't guarantee that because we have a very small IT department and
Mhm.
this is, I'm hoping that having a consultant will allow us to roll it in faster, but I know we need a year for that at least.
We haven't had it. I'm curious, it doesn't feel like this sense of urgency is there in my mind. Like July 1st or whatever, I don't know. I also agree with what Megan said, that I would definitely want to see 2 or 3 other. I appreciate, I am in the IT business. We're in sales for IT is what we've done for 23 years. And I can appreciate the idea that, oh, you have to have a vendor that knows municipalities. But that is a sales line for every one of my clients over 23 years. Security is security. And you know, I was disappointed 15 years ago or so when we didn't go with Munis, which is now Tyler. I guess maybe we have since. I don't know. Oh, we haven't. I still am disappointed. So I love that we're talking to Tyler for all the reasons I spoke about Tyler earlier. So I like it being here. But they're not the only company that can provide security services for us. So I think $35,000 as an ongoing investment, understanding that it could change, is significant. I'm not comfortable with that expense right now. I would like to hear from 2 or 3 other vendors that are providing it, and maybe more detail as to just the monitoring versus the consulting, what that would look like. I mean, I think that's where I stand.
Why were these the 2 specific names put forward by the insurance company?
Yes.
No, I mean, but why? Why were they? Is it
Why
because of the
were-
municipality?
Yes.
Okay.
So they were the 2 firms that the insurance company was aware of that were working with municipalities that the insurance company had seen the work product of.
No, one of them apparently does not exist.
Well, I mean, it could very well exist. It's just perhaps the insurance company didn't actually have the right name. It was a very generic name. I don't have the note at my hand, but it was something like work group. You know, so trying to track down work group cybersecurity solutions, I struggled. And I'm not even sure if, I don't even think work group was actually it, but at any rate, so it was a very generic name, difficult to find. And even Tyler did not have like a super big presence of, here's our cybersecurity consulting group, contact us here. I think that they have the work that they need and they're not necessarily actively marketing at this moment. Now, I have no problem with trying to put out an RFQ that says these are the services that the town is looking for, and then we find out who will respond.
However,
That's a long and lengthy process.
as an addendum to my own comments, in the reverse, even if we go through that process, what we may very well find out is that this is the right ballpark for the cost of this service. And we have an agreement pending that could net us extra months on a 1-year contract.
So I would
Right.
suggest a happy medium. I would suggest the happy medium between the RFP process, because once you put it out, you gotta wait for a significant period of time, usually 4 weeks or so. I would suggest that we instead do cast a wider net and ask for quotes. We have a general idea of what we want, ask for quotes. Let's see how fast we can turn that around. And I guess one of the things I would ask is normally nothing appears on a council agenda before it is fully vetted in front of a committee. I guess the question I have is if we look at this and we're comparing apples to oranges, apples to apples, and we've got references, can we bring this back as soon as we have that information, as opposed to waiting until June before we hit another?
I mean, I for one would like to see it as quickly as possible, because if it turns out that the Tyler price tag is comparable and we can get a few extra months for our year contracts added on, I think that makes a lot of sense for us to jump on that opportunity. So I would be happy to see it as quickly as
And
possible.
I will tell you, adding this to next year's budget, it's not gonna feel any better than adding it to this year's budget. I'm just saying, next year's budget is starting to take shape and it's shapely.
So bringing it directly to council without going through committee does not prevent us from having a good discussion about it and asking questions and vetting it at that level. So I'm comfortable with that.
It is a weird sort of public discussion to my original question. Hey, where are we susceptible? It's not a really good public discussion.
Right.
But let me see if I can find a way to get you some more information in a less public but still legal way.
I'm gonna
And I,
wander by my house with a cup of coffee. By the way,
well,
Could we, do you know what other towns, obviously, like probably Bangor has somebody on staff maybe, but who else is using what out there, I guess would be of interest to me also. Not to make this into
We
a,
can-
ridiculous
can-
project, but.
so I'm willing to throw the question out there. I don't know who will respond to it from communities, but what I get back from, I've got access to about 300 communities. We'll see.
Sure, they'll get some response.
Yeah, that's great. And I do appreciate starting the conversation now, because I think we've raised a lot of questions that will help us hopefully make thoughtful decisions when the time does come to vote on it.
Exactly.
So, but I second Leo's inclination to see several quotes before making a decision.
Yep. So we have a direction, I think. And Belle, thank you for the work that you have done so far and the presentation you've made tonight. It was very informative and certainly convinced me we need to do something. We okay now? We ready to move on? Thank you, Belle. Sophie, do you have any manager's report for us today?
I do. Bear with me because there are a few bullet points, so I'm going to try to run through them. And if you have questions, let me know. The first, I want to give you a heads up that the St. Louis Family Foundation ran the Hoop Classic for a few years, took in some money, raised some money, and they are no longer running the Hoop Classic, so they're trying to figure out what to do with those funds. They have offered to the town. They see 5 municipal buildings that the public accesses in various ways that do not have AEDs. I can't even, the defibrillation automatic. And they have offered a dollar for dollar match up to $4,000 for a total bill that's like $9,300. So it leaves about a little over $5,000 in town money. I have offered to the department heads, if they found $1,000 in each of their budgets in each of those buildings, I would kick in the rest from my professional services. Seems like a great opportunity for us to get those AEDs in. Talking with our life safety person, we would expect those to last between 7 and 10 years without having to do anything with them. So
Right.
just on the next council agenda, I am going to put in the consent accepting those grant funds. And depending on how I rationalize it through my head, there might also be approval to expend $9,000, or it might be cut up into the 5 different departments. I don't know. I just want to remind you that I sent out a budget survey. If you don't know what you want to say on that, then just put question marks all through it. If you want me to call and talk to you about it, then just say that on it, and ship it back as soon as you can. I want to give you a heads up that we are starting to see activity, getting ready to go back out and start construction projects as soon as it dries up enough. We have North Main Avenue, College Heights Chapel that will be all nice and ripped up for drainage, sewer, road improvements. North Main, a lot of that was done. There might be some finish up work there. Mahaney, which for people who have not been part of the vernacular of subdivision lore, Mahaney is the Frost development, Mount View. I used to have those like listed out in my head, but up by Frost Lane, so behind the school. That's the one that we've got $1 million, almost $1 million of wastewater work happening and drainage work and then road improvement. That Westwood went through Main Earth is getting ready. Hopefully we'll start beginning of May. That is primarily on the upper part of Westwood Drive, sewer replacement and some drainage that Rob might tag in on that. And Mill Street, I want to just bring to your attention because people will talk about it. For folks who have not been here for 2 or 3 years, we started a sanitary storm sewer separation project where if you walk around at the back of the Pine Street parking lot in the corner by where Mill Street, the back of where Mill Street and Main Street connect, there is a catch basin there, and there's usually a massive puddle there as well, because all of the water from the roof lines all along in there drain into this catch basin. Well, catch basin is connected to the sewer, which does not help with our combined sewer overflow issue. So we came up with a wonderful plan based on the drawings that we had, where we would come out on the main, on the sidewalk on Mill Street. We would disconnect the sewer, disconnect the storm drain from the sewer and just run it into a new catch basin, which now exists by Pat's Park by Mill Street. And it would just run right down into the river and life would be good. When we got into the project and got the new catch basin installed, we discovered that the drawings were not correct, that the connection from the sewer from the building that has the nest into the storm system was actually in the 18 inches or so between the 2 buildings, about halfway. So there is no way to go through and disconnect that between the 2 buildings. So we gave the owner opportunity to have the town, because it was the town's priority, to have the town come in and redirect their internal sewer line so that it would come up the front of the building and just disconnect the storm sewer from the manhole and into the sewer system. That was great. It's not only in the building, it's in the floor of the building, so it's a little bit bigger job than what we had anticipated. What we said to the person is, hey, if you're willing to support us doing this and you give us a construction easement and hold us harmless for anything but negligence, we'll come in and still have this done for you because we want it done on our time. Otherwise, you'll get a notice from the sewer system saying you have a illicit connection and we need you to do it on your own. They were really happy to have us do it.
Imagine that.
They actually have been wonderful to work with. We have a signed construction easement. They are asking us to wait until the university has closed because they have so much traffic at the nest and they're doing food preparation down below. We would not want to be doing this construction project while they were preparing food. So that is, it's gonna look like a little bit of a mess down there for a while. We have Nichols Plumbing coming in to do the interior work for us. And we are hoping to bring the original contractor back to finish the job. If not, we will get quotes because it's not a big excavation project outside the building at this point. Chris has done a really good job with that. I just want to give a huge shout out to Rob Glover. For those who don't know Rob, he's an associate professor, political science and in the Honors College. We've worked with him on a lot of student engagement projects, which have been great. I reached out to him when council started to deal with the question of should we increase council pay, which is it's a process. But should we do that? And the answer that came back was the only reason that council would really look at doing that would be if it would improve the engagement of folks who right now otherwise couldn't participate on council. So we also talked about how we made decisions like that and decided we really wanted to be data driven and not feelings driven. I reached out to Rob and said, hey, is there any chance you have any data around this question? And learned that there is a whole network of people that he belongs to that do this very question of when it comes to especially political science kind of related questions, what is the data, and they will do the research. He has created a white paper for council. I could present that, but I really felt like he did all the work and it would make more sense for him to come and present it to council. And we have decided he will do that at the first committee meeting in June. So just want to give you the update that I haven't forgotten that issue, and also that we are really fortunate to have a Rob Glover.
Did I hear you right, that you were talking about council pay? So this, you know,
I just learned, yeah. I just
Isn't that why you ran?
ordinances that we get $1,000 a year and the chair gets $1,200 a year. So congratulations, it turns out this is a paid position
I was
after all.
kind of shooting for 6 figures, but no, just a point on that. I will say that the school board went the opposite direction, as we probably know, and did away with their pay a couple of years ago, I believe.
We were
I don't
discussing
know
it
if
as
they've
an
come, I don't know if
equity
they've come back. I don't think they have. I think they should, honestly, but I feel like they haven't. And
So
just thinking about what we're doing and what they're doing, not that we're connected necessarily, but
So moving on to just the issue of
I feel like nothing's done that.
my direction from at least the previous counselors here was go find data. I did my job and delegated that, and I think came back with data that is beyond what I would have been able to do. There are some pieces in there that, like, some suggestions are like, they just go to the core of what I think political, public administration in Maine is, but that's why we have discussion and debate, right?
Can't wait to see it.
All right. Just a reminder that we have, I think Rob and Leo signed up for the elected officials training tomorrow.
Is that just a video? Just, I mean,
It's a
conference
webinar. Yep.
We had the option for a video.
Don't have to come in here, right?
No,
Okay.
right. You should have, so I signed up to
Yeah.
join it with you, so I know what they've told you, so that I can. Some places there might be like, this is how it works in Oreno kind of thing, and I might want to follow up with you on. But I got my Zoom link already. You should have already gotten
I think
your.
I saw something that I can click, yeah.
If you didn't, let me know,
Yeah.
and we'll chase that down for you tomorrow.
Just be careful what you're clicking on.
I wanna make you aware that April 27th is Maine Day. Staff has been working life safety and public safety staff have been working with the university. We have an internal group that has been meeting. There should be notices going out to the community shortly from the university in terms of kind of bigger messaging, where they usually send emails to their student population, reminding them that the code of conduct is still reigns supreme,
Still
that they
exists.
wanna behave. They also, we also reach out to the housing complexes and remind them that it's their responsibility to provide for the safety on their property, and that we're putting them on notice that we think they have a reason that they should be preparing for something more than generic Wednesday in April. We're all praying for rain, just so you know.
So I just literally checked the weather report. I was like, did they put out the weather yet?
So there is going to be a concert. We did work with them to get the concert moved to the back of campus. It might impact Old Town people a little bit on that edge, but the university, the people that surround campus on the other three sides should have some buffering from buildings and such with the concert. Concert is supposed to be done by, it's wrong, I think it was 10 with a hard stop. We got a request this week in for fireworks at the end of main day. Talked with my public safety staff. We are going to be so stretched with all the other main day activity. We have already called back the number of people that we think we can get back, and declined to issue the consumer firework. So there should not be fireworks happening. This is where we've asked for the state police IMAC team to come in. So we'll have the big command center, which we actually will not have the presence at the housing complexes. We did a lot of research, talked with law enforcement in New York City that deals with more riot type conditions where we get lots of people that have a lot of commotion, and really are preaching to step back and to be more surgical in how we approach main day, that law enforcement activity can actually exacerbate what would otherwise not happen. So we sit back away and we some of the housing complexes give us permission to review their videos so we can know what's happening. So in the past, the
If
state
you follow
has-
the right accounts on Instagram, you'll see it.
yeah, I try not to. I try really hard not to.
Fine.
We are, so the state police has normally classified main day, since we've started asking them to come up, and graduation as training events, so that we don't have to pay for it. But that is a year by year, case by case basis. Thus far, they haven't said anything about us having to pay for it. However, the additional details that we do bring, so that we have a very, very strong presence around the neighborhoods and College Ave, Park Street, Main Street, so that people know that there's law enforcement in the area. Those will cost us, by the time we're done for the day, about $7,500. So down a little bit from last year. I think the grant funding is hit or miss for that. Next year, we're actually going to put it in the budget so that we know we've got the money to pay for that extra coverage. So that's main day. If people think that we just sit back and let it happen, I'll have you know we've spent lots of hours prepping and planning and trying to mitigate the impact of main day. Just want to remind folks, if you happen to see or talk to people, that the weather is turning, it's wonderful, the snow is melting, people want to get out and build and construct and bring buildings in from afar. gotta talk to code enforcement and get permits first. Gotta make sure that what you do is actually allowed. We are here to help walk people through that. We want to try to help facilitate what people want, but there have been a couple of situations where unfortunately people have really invested heavily without talking to code only to find out that what they're asking for is, you know, and I feel horrible because I don't want anybody to invest like that. So as much as I think you're gonna see some social media in the next day or two reminding people to get permits and that our code officer is here to help them. To the degree that you can share that, and get it out to more in the media, more in the community, I would really appreciate it. Last week, I had a site visit. I was invited to a resident's home to look at their brown-tailed moths. It was truly eye-opening, and listening to all that they are dealing with regard to the impact of brown-tailed moths and how it's impacting the way that they can enjoy their property. So
Hey, Sophie, you keep tailing off
I like to.
with your sound.
Okay.
Yell at the owl.
I'm yelling at the
Yes.
owl. So this was a family that has been in Oreno for almost 50 years, has had this property, has invested heavily in creating an oasis that they can enjoy, that are now really impacted by not being able to be outside as much and having to be cautious. So one of the things that I plan to do is follow up at the staff level to support some legislation that we hope is making its way through Augusta that would create programs that would allow people to access money to take care of brown-tailed moths on their property. They had received 2 quotes. One was like $8,000 to trim trees, and the other was $2,500 to $3,000, I think, to do a little bit of trimming, but mostly like a pesticide that you inject into the tree that, yeah, it was like high tech. But one of the issues is there are no funds that like if municipalities could apply for grant funds that could then be used by private individuals, or even if the state would say, this is an issue, here's the program, municipalities, you can take your own funds and use it for that. The town of Oreno might decide that in certain situations we would go on private land. I don't know, but right now we can't. So I also, as much as you can share and like and help promote our brown-tailed moth, we've got a website that allows you to go in if you've got brown-tailed moths and pin it. So we are mapping where they are. We would really like to get that out to the community as much as we can. Mostly I was just really excited because somebody finally, first time since the pandemic, invited me on a field trip. Want to let you know that we are working with the business owner at 19 Mill Street. We've talked both with the business owner and the property owner about outdoor seating. If counselors hear concerns around that, want to just remind folks that there is an underlying boundary agreement that settled a boundary dispute between the town and the owner of 19 Mill Street that puts very clear parameters on the outdoor seating, the temporary outdoor seating at 19 Mill Street. So if people have questions or concerns, I'm more than happy to walk them through that agreement and show them the beautiful drawing that we have that underlies that. But it is not as simple as do what you want. And lastly, I have part of I belong to the Maine Town and City Managers Association, and I complained about their training opportunities, so I got invited to be part of their professional development committee. Isn't that the way it works? But as part of my activity there, I learned about, in Aroostook County, the county convenes, I think it's a monthly conversation with with their legislative representatives and representatives from all of the municipalities. Once a month when the legislature is in session. And it seemed like a really neat way to talk, not just through MMA and not just to one rep that may or may not get what you're trying to say. So I reached out to Penobscot County and asked if they might be interested in trying to create the same type of activity down here for Penobscot County. Don't know where it will go, but if they say yes, then I'm going to be asking people to please help join. So if nothing else, there are a few reps from Oreno. So I think that's my report.
Tom, you're on mute.
You're still muted. There you go.
Yeah, there I go. Thank you, Sophie, for your report. And if there is no further business to come before the council, we'll adjourn for the evening. If people want to just raise their hand and we can be gone. All right. Thank you all, and I'll see you in person on Monday, the 11th.
Thanks, Tom.